The paddock expected Red Bull to keep winning. Instead, Max Verstappen climbed out of the RB22 in Japan and described a car that gave him understeer in the morning and oversteer in the afternoon. Same circuit, same driver, two opposite problems in one day. The upgrades Red Bull rushed to Suzuka were supposed to fix this. They made it worse. Mercedes brought nothing new to Japan and locked out the top two practice positions. Red Bull brought the biggest update package on the grid and finished 10th and 15th. What the broadcast did not show was the weight. Leaked data from China put the RB22 at nearly 800 kilograms. That is 30 kilograms above the minimum limit, 30 kilograms heavier than the McLaren. By the standard engineering calculation, that excess mass alone costs 0.6 per lap before aero or tires or the power unit are even considered. 0.6 that Red Bull gives away before the car turns a wheel. Mercedes brought no upgrades and ran away from the field. McLaren brought no upgrades and was fastest in practice. Red Bull threw everything at the weekend and the gap did not shrink. This is not one problem. It is 7 problems stacked on top of each other. Weight, aero instability, tire destruction, a power unit that cannot launch, energy recovery that forces the driver to lift and coast, software that does not deploy properly, and a contract clause that could let Verstappen walk before summer if Red Bull falls outside the top 2. The question is no longer whether Red Bull can win another title. The question is whether they can fix this car before their world champion decides the project is no longer worth his time. The answer starts with the one number that makes every other problem worse before the car even reaches the first corner. The number Red Bull did not want anyone to see is 798.5 kilograms. That was the RB22 on the weighbridge in China, 30 kilograms above the minimum weight limit, 19 kilograms heavier than the McLaren MCL40. In Formula 1, weight is not just a number, it is time. 0.03 of a second per kilogram per lap is the accepted engineering standard. Do the math, and Red Bull starts every race nearly 0.6 behind before the engine even fires. Before the aero works. Before the tires touch the racing surface. 0.6 given away because the car is simply too heavy. Yet the extra mass does not just slow the car in a straight line, it punishes every corner entry, it loads the tires harder, it demands more from the brakes, it makes every aerodynamic element work less efficiently because the suspension is carrying a burden it was never designed to manage. In Bahrain, the winter testing GPS data from rival teams showed the RB22 as the class of the field. Red Bull ran 622 laps in Barcelona without a single major failure. The paddock assumed that meant readiness. It meant the opposite. The car was overbuilt. Every component was designed with a safety margin so large that the total mass ballooned beyond what the engineers anticipated. Fixing weight means redesigning the car piece by piece. Carbon fiber layers stripped back, bracket materials replaced, cooling routes rerouted, odd bolts swapped for lighter alternatives. Every gram must be hunted without creating a new weakness somewhere else. The team estimates that removing half of the excess weight would gain 4 to 5 tenths per lap. That alone would put Verstappen back in the fight for the top 5. But weight is just the first layer, and while the engineers chase grams, the rest of the car is falling apart in ways that have nothing to do with mass. Because the problems with the RB22 do not stop at what it weighs. They start there. The data from Suzuka tells a story the team cannot ignore. In first practice, Verstappen reported heavy understeer. The car would not turn. The front end pushed wide through every corner. The engineers made changes between sessions. In second practice, the understeer vanished. In its place came oversteer, the rear end stepping out. The car swinging from one extreme to the other with no middle ground. Same circuit, same driver, same day, two completely different cars. The upgrades had not fixed the balance. They had simply moved the problem from the front to the back. This is not a setup issue. This is a fundamental failure in how the suspension talks to the aerodynamics. The RB22 generates downforce, but the car does not know where to put it. As the speed increases, the aerodynamic load shifts in ways the suspension cannot compensate for. In high-speed corners, the platform becomes unstable. The driver makes steering corrections that should not be necessary in a Formula 1 car. On a circuit like Suzuka, where the first sector is one long high-speed sequence from turn 1 through the S's to Dunlop curve, this weakness is devastating. The car is fighting itself through every corner. The upgrade package Red Bull brought to Japan was substantial. Revised side pod inlets with deeper undercuts, a tighter engine cover, redesigned floor geometry. Each component worked exactly as intended suspended in isolation, but together they did not solve the coupling problem. The instability relocated rather than disappeared. What the engineers are discovering is that the RB22 has a narrow operating window. Small setup changes produce wild swings in behavior. Understeer in one session, oversteer in the next. And when the car does not give the driver a consistent platform, everything else starts to break, including the tires. Because what happens to rubber when the car never stops fighting itself is a destruction loop that no amount of setup work can escape. In China, Verstappen's soft compound tires lasted 7 laps. 7 laps before the rubber started coming apart. The data showed thermal spikes on the outside edge of the front tires. The graining was so severe that the tire structure was tearing itself apart. This is not normal degradation. This is a feedback loop that feeds on itself. The aero platform instability forces the driver to make larger steering corrections. Those corrections load the front tires unevenly. Uneven loading creates localized heat spikes. Heat spikes cause graining. Graining kills mechanical grip. Less grip means even more steering corrections. The loop accelerates every lap. Suzuka makes this worse than any circuit on the calendar. The high-speed S's in Sector 1 demand consistent lateral loading lap after lap. When the car is fighting itself through those corners, the energy going into the tire structure is far beyond what the rubber was designed to handle. The RB22 does not just wear its tires, it destroys them. The weight problem amplifies everything. 30 extra kilograms means 30 extra kilograms of energy transferred through the tires on every corner entry. More mass, more load, more heat, faster destruction. What the engineers are seeing in the thermal data is a car that does not understand how to work with its own rubber. The simulations predicted a certain degradation curve. Reality is far worse. The gap between simulation and track suggests the team does not fully understand how the RB22 loads its tires under race conditions. And while the engineers try to solve that mystery, another problem waits in the garage. One that has nothing to do with weight or aero or tires. A problem that shows up the moment the lights go out and the car refuses to move forward. The strangest part of this whole crisis is the engine. Liam Lawson in the Racing Bulls chassis clocked the second and third fastest times in power-sensitive sectors at Melbourne. Same power unit, different car. The hardware is there. The straight line speed is real, but inside the Red Bull garage, the same engine cannot get off the starting grid. 3 consecutive race starts have failed. Sprint in Shanghai, Verstappen dropped from 8th to 15th. Grand Prix in Shanghai, 8th to 11th. The moment the lights go out, the car goes backwards. This is not driver error. This is a machine that will not deploy its power when it matters most. The problem lives in the software. Red Bull's start procedure does not deliver enough battery charge at the exact moment the clutch releases. The energy harvesting strategy forces the driver to lift and coast earlier than Mercedes because the RB22 begins regenerating at lower speeds in corners. Sector data shows the gap clearly. Mercedes can recover energy without losing speed through the corner. Red Bull cannot. On a circuit like Suzuka, where the layout demands constant energy recovery over 53 laps, this difference compounds into a massive race distance disadvantage. Then there is the compression ratio question. The FIA ruled both Mercedes and Red Bull Ford engines legal after complaints from Ferrari, Honda, and Audi. But from June 1st, the measurement will shift from ambient temperature to operating temperature. If the theory about thermal expansion is correct, Red Bull could lose whatever power unit advantage they have for 16 races starting mid-season. The irony is brutal. The engine was supposed to be the weak link. The chassis was supposed to carry the team. Instead, the chassis is broken and the engine is waiting for a regulation change that could erase its only edge. And while the engineers chase software fixes, the championship standings are already telling a story the team cannot afford to ignore. Mercedes leads the Constructors' Championship with 98 points. Ferrari sits second with 67. McLaren third with 18. Haas fourth with 17. Red Bull is fifth with 12. 12 points from 4 races. The team that won 4 straight Constructors titles now sits behind a midfield outfit that spent most of its existence at the back of the grid. In the Drivers' Championship, George Russell leads with 51, Kimi Antonelli has 47, Charles Leclerc 34, Lewis Hamilton 33. Max Verstappen is 8th with 8 points. 8 points behind a Haas driver. The last time Verstappen sat this far back after multiple races, he was a teenager driving for Toro Rosso. That was 10 years ago. The numbers get worse when you look at race pace. In Shanghai, Verstappen was lapping 1.7 seconds slower than race winner Antonelli before the ERS coolant failure ended his day on lap 64. 1.7 seconds. That is not a gap. That is a different category of car. The constructors' deficit to Mercedes is 86 points. The summer break is coming, and inside Verstappen's contract is a clause that reportedly lets him walk if Red Bull falls outside the top 2 in the championship by the summer break. Right now, they are 5th. Helmut Marko stepped back from his advisor role at the end of 2025, but he remains close to Verstappen. When asked about the situation, he said Red Bull is known for recovering ground quickly and everything is still possible. Then he added something the team did not want to hear. A driver with a Mercedes power unit will likely win the 2026 championship. That statement was not about the engine, it was about the car that surrounds it, and while the championship slips away, the clock is already running on the one thing Red Bull cannot buy more of: time. The calendar gave Red Bull something unexpected, a 5-week gap between Suzuka and Miami. Bahrain and Saudi Arabia were pulled from the schedule because of the conflict with Iran. That means no racing for 5 weeks. For most teams, this is a chance to catch their breath. For Red Bull, it is both a lifeline and a trap. 5 weeks to solve 7 problems: weight, aero instability, tire degradation, start procedure, energy harvesting, software calibration, setup sensitivity. Each one would be a major project on its own. Together, they are a crisis that no amount of time can fully fix. The factory in Milton Keynes is running flat out. Engineers are stripping the car down piece by piece, looking for grams to remove. The ERS deployment software is being rewritten using Ford's digital simulation tools. The start procedure is being rebuilt from the ground up. The aero platform is being studied to understand why it swings so wildly between sessions. But there is a limit to what 5 weeks can deliver. Developing solutions for 7 problems means each one gets roughly 5 days of focused engineering before manufacturing timelines take over. And the problems are not separate. They are connected. Fix the aero and the cooling changes could add weight. Rewrite the software and new reliability risks appear. The one advantage is that no points are being awarded during the break. The 86-point deficit to Mercedes stays frozen until Miami, but the pressure is not just about the championship. Verstappen's contract clause hangs over everything. If Red Bull cannot show progress before the summer break, the question will shift from whether they can fix the car to whether their driver believes they ever will. And inside the paddock, the opinions on what happens next are already dividing, because not everyone sees this crisis the same way. Some see a team in free fall, others see something else entirely. The escape clause in Verstappen's contract is real. Multiple sources confirm it activates if he falls outside the top 2 in the championship by the summer break. Right now, he sits 8th. 51 points behind Russell. 4 races remain before summer. Red Bull leadership says they are not worried. They point to 2022 when they fell behind at the start of a regulation cycle and still won the title. But that car had a healthy foundation. The RB22 doesn't. The problems are not superficial. They are structural, weight, aero, tires, power unit software, energy recovery, start procedure, 7 layers of failure stacked on top of each other with no clear path to a solution. Verstappen himself has been clear. After China, he called the racing Mario Kart, drivers boosting past each other on one straight, then getting repassed on the next when the battery runs out. He said anyone who enjoys this does not understand what racing is. The paddock is split. Lewis Hamilton, thriving at Ferrari, calls the 2026 regulations the best racing he has ever experienced. Fernando Alonso calls it a battery world championship. Lando Norris says the sport went from the best cars to the worst in one regulation change. Jonathan Wheatley, now at Audi, made the sharpest observation. And the criticism only exists because the team doing the criticizing is struggling more than anyone expected. If Verstappen leaves Red Bull, the driver market explodes. Mercedes would reconsider Russell and Antonelli. Ferrari would look at their lineup. Aston Martin would enter the conversation. The team that built the most dominant era in modern Formula 1 would lose the driver who defined it. But the question is not whether Verstappen can leave. The question is whether Red Bull can give him a reason to stay. The factory in Milton Keynes has solved impossible problems before. They turned 2022 around. They built a car that won 4 straight titles. But they have never faced a crisis like this. 7 problems stacked like compound fractures. A driver who is running out of patience. And a contract clause that could change everything before the summer sun hits the Miami asphalt.